This manner, therefore, pray ye, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. From thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Two of our session deal with Noah's Ark. So we can go back and see where we left off last night. Go ahead and bring up the PowerPoint. See, we'll be able to be good. Can we see it? Got our display. Well, let me disconnect from it. Bam. Thank you, ma'am. Disconnected. And reconnect. One minute. And it should show. Not yet. See what it shows right now. Yeah, that should have worked. Should have came up right there. But it didn't. See if that word receiver comes up then. Anything? Nope. Did it show up on the TV right there? Nothing?
Is it on? We need the front TV on.
So, it shows the display. That's not. Plug it in. Try thing number two. Connect it from there. Unplug it. Secondary one. I'll work better on that. Nah, yesterday wasn't the same. Yesterday, boom, connected, and then boom, comes that up there. I think the screen went dark. So, things that up next to me. Is there a way you can just hook up a power straight back there? All right, we can probably try that. All right, there we go. Appreciate you, sir. That's why you got a team. All right. Hopefully it works with me, not against me. And Now double check, see if we good. All right, then we're good. All right, so beautiful. All right, so now let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and continue where we left off yesterday with Noah's Ark. We go ahead and start going back to my portfolio. Noah's Ark. So all right, yesterday we covered flood stories around the world. We also covered the location of the Ark, the massive anchor stones. We also covered the boat size and then animals on board. So now we're gonna get into other things, then with gopher wood, an actual ship, Noah's home, and understanding the evidence of the Ark. All right, let's get into it. Gopher wood. So also then with lamented gopher wood, what said the scriptures? Get Genesis chapter 6 and verse 14. Genesis chapter 6, verse 14. Go ahead and get that. That'll be for reference.
Genesis chapter 6, verse 14. Make thee an ark of gopher wood.
So it says, make thee an ark of gopher wood. Read.
Room shalt thou make in the ark.
So gopher wood, when you look that up in your concordance, you get H1613. Gopher deal with cypress wood. So exact identity of the wood is uncertain, but gopher wood is simply a transliteration of the Hebrew dealing with just a type of wood. So in the core, when it says wood, it is by extension something that actually comes from a tree, timber, things of that nature. So when it says in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 14, read on.
Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it of. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits. The breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above. And the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof. With lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it.
Right. So now, more proof points to it actually being lamented wood on Noah's Ark. So now we're going to read this. You guys should read that, or you can read it from here. I'll follow along with this one. Go ahead.
Over the past 15 years, the Turkish government, through the Noah's Ark Commission, has cooperated with Ron White on obtaining and evaluating structural specimens of Noah's Ark.
From Noah's Ark. So, started obtaining and evaluating the structural specimens from Noah's Ark. So the structure being what it's made out of. Read on.
One of these specimens was a piece of fossilized deck planking, which many of you have seen on the updated Noah's Ark videos. The most recent news in regards to this specimen is that thin sections have been cut from this deck timber for microscopic examination. As you can see in the photo that we have provided below, a corner section was cut out from the incredibly hard fossilized deck timber. The Aramaic root word for the Hebrew word gopher wood means laminated wood. This is when layers wooden boards are glued together one upon another to provide extra strength. And when these cuts were completed, it was plainly evident that at least this portion of the deck planking is laminated wood. The excess of the cementing substance, the glue used was resin, which was made from tree sap, was squeezed out of the end of the planks, hardened, and had remained in the fossilized form. Until this cut was made, it was merely assumed that the dripping material along with the outer edge was pitch placed on the outer surfaces of the deck timbers and the rest of the boat. But now the amazing fact has come to light that the construction methods used by Noah to build the ark included laminating. Further documentation will appear in an upper updated version of the book Discovered Noah's Ark, and the upcoming video that we will release on Noah's Ark.
Right. So now you having those particular type thing. Now one may say, I don't see any petrified wood. So one would think that trained scientists, oh, switch tabs. I can see it. Oh, I went to the next page. All right. So down at the bottom says, some may say, well, I don't see any petrified wood. So one would think that trained scientists would be able to recognize the fragments found scattered all the way around the ship as pieces of petrified wood, but they don't. Why? Because they're trained evolutionists. They are taught and firmly believe that all petrified wood displays growth rings. But without a belief in the biblical account, they do not understand or believe that prior to the flood, which they don't believe in, conditions were such that growth rings did not occur. Not how we see them today. Because understanding what causes growth rings, you guys may remember this a while back when I dealt with dating methods. All right, back when I was first dealing with the science and understanding, Genesis part 1, I dealt those things. All right, so more of that information there. So now, going back to that, in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 5, which you can go ahead and read that, Genesis 2 and 5.
Genesis chapter 2 and verse 5. And every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground. But there went up a mist from the earth, and watered the whole face of the ground.
Right. All these details let you know that the commonalities we see within weather, rain, things that there was a difference back then. It just said a mist came up. There wasn't rain that fell like what we see actually today. Most times when you deal with like tropical, he kept it like nice and tropical where everything grew on its own. It was fruitful. Didn't rain yet upon the earth. It didn't rain to the flood, which also explained why they didn't even see a flood event coming, because they never rained before. So things of that nature. So now, reading on, let's go ahead and continue on with this particular one.
Which one?
This article.
Up top.
Yep. After Genesis 2 and 5, where it said the scripture.
Genesis 2 and 5. Okay. And every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field. You want me to read the article?
Where it said this scripture?
Okay. This scripture has just told us that there was no more rain. There was no rain before the flood, which is probably one of the reasons that the world would not believe that there was a coming flood. The laws of nature, which would be in effect in order to have no rain, but to have this mist, which watered the whole face of the earth, would include a very constant temperature. This temperature would not have varied over more than 10 or so degrees. This relatively small variation in temperature would not have been great enough to cause the water in the air to totally condense into raindrops, but would instead produce an effect similar to a greenhouse or a terrarium. Each day, in the cool of the evening, dew would appear on the ground. In the morning, this dew would evaporate, and as the temperature rose, day after day, this cycle would continue, keeping a perfect balance of moisture both in the air and on the soil.
So now, getting to what causes growth rings. Go ahead and read that.
What causes growth rings? Growth rings in trees and other plants are caused by a variation in the water supplied to the plant. Annual rings today occur when the temperature drops and the sap in the tree fails to rise. The leaves of the deciduous trees turns color and die, soon dropping off. In the spring, the warmth releases the trees from its state of hibernation, and the sap begins to flow again. Even though there may be water in the ground, when the temperature drops, the tree does not continue in the cycle until it is again spring. Therefore, a ring results when the growth is temporarily halted and begins when spring arrives.
Right. Changes with the season and also changes with weather temperatures. Read on.
Sometimes weather conditions such as drought can result in numerous rings in one season.
And because of these things, goes back to what I dealing like with dating methods using tree rings, why it's inaccurate, because you can get multiple tree rings in a particular season just based upon weather patterns, droughts, and things of that nature. Read on.
During a severe drought, the tree is deprived of its water supply and growth halts temporarily. Then, then a rain comes along and growth resumes during the same season. And here we have 2 rings in 1 year. There is no way to determine the number of rings which belong to 1 year. So this method is not reliable in determining a tree's age.
Which I covered extensively back dealing with that Genesis lesson I did. Continue. Read the bottom
Petrified
portion.
wood, which contain rings such as that found in Arizona, is post flood. Even the evolutionist admits the absence of growth rings in wood from what they call the carbon fibrous period.
Right. So now, getting back with that just a little bit with the wood, but we're actually going to get more of the stuff dealing with how we know it's actually a ship. All right, so one, we got Zondervan Compaq Bible Dictionary, we deal with ark. So one of it is Ark of Noah, a chest, a vessel to float. So you're dealing with a floating vessel, because these are things that some people may argue. So you deal with the floating vessel of wood that was actually made. So ship with 3 stories and a door is stated to be made in verse 16. And then verse 14, see factor point to an ark. So verse 15, see for a boat measurement. So now, we deal with when they were actually dividing and actually excavating the area, there was actually, as I talked about, an earthquake that ripped down the middle, created a vertical split, which allowed Ron Wyatt to measure the depth of the boat and allow fresh sediment to be dug up for analyzing. So these are some of the pictures there. You have the before and after images. The before is up there in the upper left, the black and white was before that earthquake came. So you see it was harder to see, this looked like more dirt, but then you see more depth was added after the earthquake in that bottom right picture. More images will also come as I scroll ahead. So it's a 1960 Turkish U.S. team when they first went to go investigate this ark. And then this is the Wyatt Expedition 1979, more of it is broken away. Before breaking away, more breaking away. Before, after. Moving on. All right, so now this is another picture of before and after. You know, you can kind of see the difference between the depth that gave away, bottom before, the upper portion after. So this is where a highlight of that crack, where it went down, or where they were able to actually go ahead and stick in the different rods, things of that nature, actually excavate, dig up, and actually get more of the proof to prove that, hey, this is actually some sort of ship. So they were taking samples from the surrounding area for a comparison soil study, because some people say, well, you know what, if you find the same sample that you would right here on the earth as you would outside of it, then it probably ain't a boat. That's what they were looking at. But the data showed high carbon content proved long-term decay of wood, proving a wooden man-made structure with trace metals that support iron support beams, being part of instituted within the ark itself, which they're standing on. Then you also had, which I quote from Dr. Shea, metal detectors showed an unmistakable pattern of regular features delineating a symmetrical internal subsurface structure of massive proportions. Meaning, somebody made this. That's just it. That's all you got to remember for that. Somebody made this, all right? So that's just a quote of Dr. Shea, one of the ones who was there actually doing, you know, the scan, looking at the actual information and the details of the records. So in looking at, well, look, this is what it's showing. There's anything symmetrical showing that there's order. These things are lining up together. So just like you did with like pillars, if there's multiple pillars in the building, you know, someone put this one here, it's lined up, it's symmetrical to this. It wasn't just random. If it was random, you wouldn't see symmetry along this as if it was designed by a man. Man's gonna make sure I put this here, I put this here, just like no different than the rows of chairs in his classroom. You know, they're lined up by many various people to help out, from Amon to, you know, Unc, you know, and then to myself, and then to, you know, other brothers to help put them in order. That's something that was done by a man that shows order. Then if it was all rapidly buried and you find and you dig it up to where, oh, someone lined these chairs up nice and neat. Looks like somebody actually did this. It didn't just kind of form this way. That's all they're saying. And the internal subsurface structure deals with something of a massive proportion. It's not just one small area. It's going up and down the totality of the structure. That's what you're looking at. So now in August 1984 to August 1985, they showed readings and patterns, and the results from all 3 metal detectors were consistent. And that little opening you see to the side is for the door. that's why I said pay attention to that door, which they later found, and I did show in earlier images yesterday, as far as that door where it was separated from the particular ark. I want to say probably like a mile away, something like that nature. I got to double check. So, but nevertheless, let's move on. So they also have 4 different types of metal detectors that they actually use. All produce positive readings as translated here in visibility, observable features. So which, like ribs of this nature, which they're just highlighting, which I'll show you another picture that actually show more of the ribs. But outside the structure, there were no positive readings that occurred in regions taken outside the boat-like area. So all these areas down here, there were no positive readings of this same type of structure. So meaning it's not something that this is just part of a mountain or a hill or earth that's connected to everything else around it. Otherwise, you would see that continuity, but we don't see that. So with it, Rod and his team was able to collect a sample of 91% iron that showed preferential gradients under microscopic examination. So in an hour, this had meant that this had been hand worked. So meaning there was such a high level of iron content that was abnormal than what they took fragments and specimens from in the outside structure, that this had to be designed by man. Could it be a situation that was an accident? You couldn't have this much order from something that was an accident. So in August 1985, radar scans were done showing massive Keelson decks, and I'll show you Keelson in a minute with the Keelson deck tubers. So open chambers and other nautical configurations show an ancient man-made ship. This is what you're dealing with these Keelsons. Notice here at the bottom, this portion here at the bottom that pretty much gives the support going down from the beginning to the end of the structure. This is what you're dealing with. This is the thing that they're actually finding and picking up through the metal detection through the scans, which this is what you're seeing here. This is what they're finding internally. And they're also seeing transverse lines with the bulkhead, even lines going back and forth right here, showing the structure of what's actually integral to an actual ship. This is what they're finding with this particular actual specimen. So, or with this monument or with this structure, whichever one wants to kind of cut it. But nevertheless, it all showing that it was shipped. So, and these being the size of it, how it was cut, even given the depth examination from 1985 to 1987 proved this was at one point in time a 3-deck boat. Although now it became compacted, but it actually showed the depth that at one point in time this was, how the scriptures deal with, 3 stories. So it had 3 stories. So neither just the scans, the radar scans, and then even then, this is actually showing overall the hull, the rear hull section, the rear, the front, damage section where the keel was, and then the front hull section in the door. So this is just another actual survey just kind of showing the same thing and them trying to doing the scans at the bottom, looking at all this information. So now, this is from Dr. Arthur Brandenberger, so photogrammetrist. He says, I have no doubt at all that this object is a ship. In my entire career, I've never seen an object like this on a stereo photo. So once again, artdiscovery.com, picture of the ark, but that one is before the earthquake in 1979. This is just another one. This is an artist impression by Tim Mitchell from archaeological research by Ron Wyatt, just an example of this drawing based upon the information and things finding. And like I said, that door size opening, close up of that image we were looking at before, in a bigger portion way back here, it is zoomed in, this portion up over here to the door size opening. Right there. Which you also see here in a portion, and you also see here on these radar scans that show that door opening. All right, so now this one here, just showing what would be, like from the top, portion of the boat, portion of the wood torn back, shown here in an animated drawing, which is also shown here before 1985 and then 1990 with these ribbed timbers, showing the pattern of wood that you would see here within the internal structure of the ark. You show the ark here just in a bigger picture in this location. All right, so that's just more as far as with the wood pattern of the ship. We're gonna get a little more information. Let me go ahead and get, it's just more of the radar scans and the internal structure of it. So showing the Keelsons and showing the actual timbers, things of that nature. So like we said, the results of the metal detector and subsurface radar scans and the regular patterns, how they actually had to line everything up to get the patterns and show where everything was falling. And like I dealt with those who weren't here, yesterday, but it measures 300 cubits, actually exactly 300 cubits. So there's just that end piece that they found that connected to it and shows 515 feet. But remember, you're dealing with a royal Egyptian cubit, not a Hebrew cubit that came later. So the Hebrew cubit was more so used like Tom and David, like forward with that cubit. But before, in the time of Moses and the time of us, in Egypt and coming out of Egypt, on the cubit we knew was a royal Egyptian cubit. All right. So now just other pictures. Now let's get some other things for the record. So this one is very important to actually read. All right. I'm going to go ahead and read this. You go ahead, ask me that one. I'll go ahead and get you started with reading this particular one on the secondary tablet. So we are on actual ship, scrolling all the way down to the bottom. All right, we're going to read these records. So more about it being a ship. Showed you the pictures. Now we're going to read. Go ahead. And we'll just take turns reading.
For the record, during the course of Ron's work on the various projects, numerous people have wanted to become involved. Some have felt Ron was unqualified to continue the work because of his lack of credentials, and they pursued independent research without Ron. Well, initially, some of these people declared a belief in the validity of certain discoveries. They today have changed their opinion, and we fully believe everyone has a right to their own opinion. However, sometimes all of the facts concerning some of the independent research isn't made available along with the change of opinions. So we felt it was time to discuss some of these matters. Although we are supposed to meet opposition with the same meek spirit as Christ displayed, we are obligated to state the simple facts so that people may have the means to make an intelligent decision as to what they believe.
All right, so cool, next page. So now it's a 1987 radar scans, jointly sponsored by Ataturk University and staff of Los Alamos National Lab. So this is 1 month after the official dedication of Noah's Ark, independent radar scans were performed on the site. We were given a copy of what we were told was the official report of those scans. However, to be sure it was authentic, I took a copy of it to Turkey on our June 1992 tour, and when Silla Barukatutun met Ron and I in Erzurum on our last afternoon there, I personally showed it to him and asked if it was authentic. I felt he would certainly know since his name was listed as a co-author of the report. Silla, as a professor of Ataturk University in Erzurum, and as a member of the commission that was established to study Noah's Ark, he assured me it was the official report. It is titled, July 1987, Geophysical Investigation of Noah's Ark, Dunapar Site, Mara Village, Dobazat Ari, John R. Blumengarten, University of California, Los Alamos National Laboratory, MSAL, Birkatan, Ataturk University, Faculty of Engineering, November 1987. Erzurum, Turkey. This report explains in highly technical language the process and data of their radar scans, and were performed by geologist, radar operator Thomas Fenner, which is page 6 of the report. The scans were performed with an SIR Cirrus System 8 ground-penetrating radar manufactured by Geophysical Survey Systems of Hudson, New Hampshire, whose antenna was dragged across the site on transects spaced 2 meters apart. So, which we showed earlier, those white lines that you kind of saw laid out upon the structure. So radar pulses approximately 5 nanoseconds in width were transmitted at a repetition rate of 50 kilohertz, which is on page 2, with radar operating at a frequency of 120 megahertz in order to achieve the maximum penetration, page 8. In summarizing the data, the report states, the most noteworthy feature observable in the data of figure 7 is the V-shaped reflector that is particularly evident in this transect between y equals -6m and y equals -50m. When the topographical variation of the surface is taken into account, one finds that this feature is almost planar in form. The large amplitude of the back reflected radar signal suggests a large contrast in the dielectric properties of the two sides of a sharply defined interface. The material above the interface presumably is the clay soil observable at the ground surface and exposed to several meters depth in the scarp surrounding the site and in the cracks and in gullies in the adjacent mudflow environment. The crucial issue is the type of material which lies below the interface. Is it bedrock that rises up through the mud flow to form something like a small island around which the flow moves? Or the material is something other than bedrock? At least two considerations suggest that it is not bedrock. The first is that in the transect between y equals 2m and y equals 220m and x0 in the vicinity in the rock that outcrops of the surface, one does not observe consistently strong reflections of a similar character. The most likely candidate for the bedrock material is the calcareous rock that forms the hills on either side of the mudflow channel and that comprises the outcrop near the middle of the site. Since the low amplitude radar returns in the outcrop imply a small dielectric contrast between the clay soil and calcareous rock, the strong reflections of the prominent V-shaped feature are probably not caused by transition from clay soil to calcareous bedrock, which is actually good. So now, the second consideration which argues that the material below the reflecting interface may not be bedrock is that in several scans, and bedrock it's not just a part of just random earth, all right? So it's not just random earth that's just there, similar to the rest of the structure. So now, a second consideration argues that the material below the reflecting interface may not be bedrock is that in several scans, especially between y equals -18m and y equals -38m, there is a double reflection suggestive of a layer rather than a simple transition to material many meters thick. To find such an extensive, almost planar layer buried within a channel through which a huge volume of mudflow material has been moved in a chaotic fashion is highly anomalous from the standpoint of known landslides and debris flow mechanics. If the layer pertains to a buoyant man-made structure, the layer's present setting suggests that the structure has been transported to the present location by a landslide event where it was stranded upon the rock, which now outcrops near the middle of the site. Pages 8 and 10 of the report. Which information I covered yesterday that the information brought out lines up with the report that they can tell this is some sort of man-made wooden structure that actually moved from its original point through the bedrock and got to where it is. So not that it just originally landed here. So in the last paragraph of this report it states, we conclude that data of our geographical investigation no way conflict with the proposition that the unusual boat-shaped site near Marriott Village contains the remains of Noah's Ark. So they're saying that, look, based on the evidence of all these reports and scans, by no means are we arguing against that this is some sort of boat and what you guys are saying, this being Noah's Ark. So far, everything is lining up, this is legit. Radar scans is coming back that this is actually a boat, this is clearly a boat, and it just moved at some point in time due to a landslide or earthquake that brought it to its current position, but everything proves it's a boat. So now, in simple terms, this report states that those radar scans did not rule out the possibility that the site contained the remains of Noah's Ark, because not just any boat, but Noah's Ark. That's what we're doing. That's the argument. So now, in fact, the data presented in this report of a sharply defined interface, this is almost planar in form, is entirely consistent with Ron's 1984 conclusion that the floor of the hole is covered with ballast material, which he believes comprises the interface they detected. He had found large masses of manganese dioxide which had fallen out of the interior of the boat-shaped object, where a 3-foot section of the northern end had broken away, leaving a hole into the interior. Ballast is placed in the hulls of ship to provide stability, and it is secured in sections which hold it in place and prevent it from shifting. Could the interface they detected have been the actual petrified timbers of the floor of the hull, as was the ballast? It's possible. Petrified meaning that now whatever this particular item was, because it can be people, when I deal with the world of Adam and pre-flood and dinosaurs and man coexisting, that you deal with a lot of things being turned to petrified or fossilized is the mineral, what's known as mineral deposit or mineral transition, where the deposits of one thing is switched with the deposits that it's actually in. So let's just say a hat fell in the ground. Hat stays in the ground, buried underneath, water, dirt, pressure, heat, which is temperature. The minerals of that hat start to transfer out while the minerals of the dirt start to transfer in, thus hardening the hat and petrifying it, thus turning it to stone. That's what you're dealing with. Same thing happens with wood, same thing can happen with people. So that's what we're dealing with petrified. All right, so now, moving on. So now it says, since the density of the ballast material and that of the fossilized hull will be so much denser than the clay material in the calcareous of the bedrock underneath the site, there would not be a recognizable interface between these two similarly dense materials. This concept is demonstrated by their statement concerning the small dielectric contrast between the clay soil and the calcareous rock. That's what you're dealing with. So now it says, the depth revealed by the scans, continue reading, on this page. Oh yeah, you there. Go ahead, read that page. Where it says,
All the depths right here.
this planner right there.
This planet-shaped interface varied between 4 to 8 millimeters in depths, or 13 to 26 feet beneath the surface, which again confirms Ron's initial 1979 measurements taken through
Longitudinal
crack, which was produced by the December 1778 earthquake. Ron's diagram with measurements published in his 1980 booklet, Noah's Arks Found, is seen in below pics. Interestingly, it was the 1984 specimen of the ballless material which Cal Jim Irwin sent to Los Alamos labs for analysis as a favor to Ron, which first captured John Bagoner's interest and led to his participation in researching the site. 1988 core drills. The above discussed report states in its conclusion the necessity of doing some core drills, which they were able to do in July of 1988. For a moment, let's consider the size of the core drills. Those taken during the 1988 independent group were 3.5 inches in diameter. The entire surface of the site would therefore accommodate several 100,000 3.5 inches core drills. How many were performed and what did they reveal? In his August 1998 newsletter titled A Search for the Elusive Ark, Dr. John Bargadin wrote, between July 20th and August 7th we succeed, praise God, and drill 4 holes to a depth of 10 meters and recover reasonably good cores from each of the holes. Three of the holes were near center line of the site, while the 4th was near the outer flank of the longitudinal hump. Another notable discovery was the presence 3 location in the mud flow layer of nodules of the nodules of the bright yellow mineral laminate. Laminate is the hydrated oxygen of iron, and its occurrence.
The hydrated what?
The hydrated oxygen.
Hydrated oxide
of iron.
Of iron. All right. One of the main material that would be present on the ark due to it actually being a man-made structure. Read on.
And its occurrence in this environment appears to be anomalous.
So an anomaly is something that is rare, strange, peculiar, things of that nature, because this is just dirt and rocks. You shouldn't have this high of a concentration or finding this particular type of material. So read on.
Just how anomalous is this crucial question? Since the minerals in the rocks in the source area of the mud flow have a moderate iron content. However, during the months now that I have worked at this site, I have never seen this bright yellow material anywhere in this fissures or exposure in the mud flow clay, because earlier investigations led us to suspect unusual amounts of iron in the site. These occurrences of laminate are a special interest because they could represent the rusted remains of metallic iron objects.
Right, beautiful. So now there's a final observation concerning the core samples with the absence, apart from the laminate nodules, of possible evidence for man-made structure. There was, for example, no evidence for wood, petrified or otherwise, However, core drilling is severely limited in its ability to find buried archaeological structure, especially if it is sparsely distributed and has been significantly altered by decay and chemical weather. So taking 4 core specimens of 3.5-inch diameter from a site 515 feet long does not provide a fair representation of material present. Why? Because they're pretty much saying, in one of the arguments, the final observation, concerning the core samples, with the absence, apart from the laminite nodules, of possible evidence for man-made structure, and them arguing that, hey, look, this is them being other scientists looking at these reports. There was, for example, no evidence for wood, petrified or otherwise. But what they're saying is, well, mind you, this structure is 515 feet long, and you're looking at a 4 core specimens of 3.5-inch diameter. So you're looking at about, let's just say, easily 3 times 4, what, 16? No, 12? I mean, I thought I messed up, huh? So, nevertheless, you're looking at, okay, 12 inches out of 515 feet. And you're looking at, all right, probably sometimes it's rejecting the fact because, hey, within these 12 feet I'm looking at, it doesn't seem to actually have petrified wood. Whereas they're arguing, well, the whole thing is 515 feet long. There's more to examine, and then in other parts of reports, we have found wood. So these things are not necessarily the end-all, be-all with these particular 4 core specimens. But going on with the other information and facts. Conclusion. Both the radar scans and the core drills, we are told by the writer, the independent research results do not rule out the possibility that this is a man-made structure. So comments on the radar scans. Some people have commented that the radar operator, Tom Fenier, could not get the same results that Ron did in his numerous 1986 and 1987 scans. That is not the case. Mr. Fenier did not get the same results, but he could have. When Ron spoke with Joe Rosetta, then Vice President of Geographical Survey Systems, concerning Tom Fenier's scans, Mr. Rosetta explained that Mr. Fenier had used the Surrey system at settings which would detect objects of greatest density at the maximum depth, which it did, and which is expressed in the above excerpted report. Ron, on the other hand, had returned to the site many times and performed scans at varying frequencies, which penetrated at varying depths. And he also performed scans in early spring when a greater amount of moisture is held in the fossilized superstructure, which made it more reflective than in July when it was relatively dry. So now, several years ago, Ted Stewart, owner of the Sunset Bookstore in Lubbock, Texas, and a teacher at the Sunset School of Preaching, visited us to personally investigate all the evidence. A thorough researcher he called Tim Fenier in an effort to understand the radar scans and why Mr. Fenier didn't get the same results as Ron. When Mr. Stewart bluntly asked Mr. Fenier if Ron could have faked his readings, Mr. Fenier replied no. He had watched the video of the initial scans as they were done and saw the printout as it occurred. So even Ron's finding that they're saying, like, hey, everything you found, it couldn't have been fake because as he's actually getting the readings, everything's printing out right then and there. So he wouldn't have had time to fake the actual recordings. So everything would prove to be legit and real as he actually found it. So now, comments on the core drills. Independent researchers took 4 3.5-inch core drill specimens from an area roughly equal to the surface of 1.5 football fields. In that extremely small sample of the material of the site, they found evidence which could represent the remains of rusted man-made objects, but they found no evidence of petrified wood. This lack of petrified wood and this extremely minute sampling, in their own words, does not rule out the possibility that any is present in the site. So they did clarify that just because we didn't find it within these couple of inch specimens does not rule out that it's not here. We're just saying from this portion that we found. Today, most of the research involved in these independent surveys state publicly that they do not believe the site to be that of Noah's Ark. That is certainly their privilege, but the results of the radar and core drills remain valid. So the results still remain valid and still don't rule out that strong possibility of it being the Ark because it shows to be man-made structure, high-level wood. You see an integral support area. You also see everything else lining up to show this is actually made this way. So now, moving on. So now, as I said, but the results of the radar and core drills remain valid. If their data did not rule out the possibility that the site contained man-made structures in 1987 and 1988, it certainly does not today. Opinions are different, those change, but facts don't. So now, on the petrified wood in the structure, one scientist involved in the above work, when he examined the deck timber, told Ron it wasn't petrified wood because it didn't have any growth rings. As recently as this last month, we've heard the same belief expressed by another educator. Yet, even evolutionists, geologists all over the world recognize that what they term carboniferous wood has no growth rings. Quote, if we can imagine horsetails enlarged with 3 feet to trees, 60 to 100 feet high, we reproduce the calamites of the carboniferous forest. In their youth, these trees had exactly the same structure as the horsetails. Only as they grew older did they acquire wood in the secondary bark that supported them and led the sap to all parts of the plant. The giant club Mosses, Sigillaria, and Lepidodendron, the main inhabitants of the carboniferous forest, raised their tufts of leaves 60 to 100 feet above the ground. So now, to support trunks of 6-foot base diameters and 60 to 100 feet height, tissues must increase in thickness from year to year. There was, as we have already said, secondary bark and wood similar to that of modern trees, but lacking the spring and winter rings, which correspond to seasonal alternation of moisture and dryness. This is further proof that the carnivorous climate was fairly uniform, meaning it didn't change or go up and down. There wasn't big variations of hot and cold, things of that nature. It stayed pretty uniform, as we were bringing out earlier, pretty consistent in its temperature. That's from the LaRue's Encyclopedia of Earth, published by the Hamlin Publishing Group Limited, London, New York, Sydney, Toronto, copyright 1961, revised edition 1972. Now the next quote, in 1951, Baxter, in his publication, The Transactions of the Kansas Academy of Science, made something in the print which many geologists already knew, which happened to be true all over the world as far as I've been able to find. He says this, it has been shown that a lack of annual rings is characteristics of wood of all carboniferous plants the world over. It's true here, it's true of the trees I've looked at in America and everywhere else. They just don't have any annual ring system, which actually goes back, which helps substantiate the proof of the art doing these are taken from trees that didn't have any rings, which isn't necessarily something that hasn't been seen in science. So now, we already covered what causes as far as rings, things of that nature, but we'll kind of go ahead and continue on. So now, let's get an atheist even called to the ship. I'll get this one. So March 1985, Ron and Dave Ferrosot arrived in Turkey on March 20, 1985. Meeting them in Ankara was Samran el-Matari, the Saudi Arabian prince who had come to visit Ron earlier in Madison, Tennessee. He had heard about Ron's claim that Mount Sinai was in his region of Saudi by some of Ron's captors in 1984, and he wanted Ron to show him the mountain. Perhaps to check out Ron's veracity, he wanted to see the so-called Noah's Ark. And then he would arrange for Ron and Dave to enter into his country, but Samran was quite ill when they arrived, so the men couldn't leave for Dolgabizanat right away. Turkey's leading archaeologist, though, Ekrem Akaro, while they waited in Ankara, Mine Unler, one of Ron's liaisons with the Turkish government, arranged for a meeting with Dr. Ekrem Arago, Turkey's leading archaeologist, world famous for his work on the Hittite excavations throughout Turkey. In October 1984, the Turks had sent their own archaeologists to investigate the boat-shaped object, and Dr. Akruga had carefully studied their reports. Ron had loaned the Turkish scientists one of the White's ferromagnetic metal detectors, and their expedition had yielded very positive results, as one of them showed Ron their field notes. They had retrieved several 4-foot-long metal spikes, which were still intact, but which Ron never got to actually see. So as he was told, they were taken to the Museum of Mines and Minerals in Ankara. They had also gotten the same pattern of metal readings that Ron had gotten. It is, at any rate, a ship. Ron spoke with Dr. Akaro in a conversation which Dave videoed. He stated that it is, at any rate, a ship for which there was no earthly explanation for, which was of a size not known until recent history, and which was many miles from any body of water. So now, all these things adding up to where it had to have been art, to where you have this fossilized ship here, everything seemed to point to it being a ship, but it's nowhere near any reasonable body of water to kind of explain that it kind of got here in a sort of what you would think a normal fashion. It had to have been through an abnormal fashion, something which the flood that actually put it there. Same thing when you deal with all the different actual stones that are found that are attached to it, you know, and throughout that area. those stones, those anchor stones, are 100 miles away from any near natural body of water. And they're so big, they couldn't possibly have been moved there by any one person. So it had to have been, in which they, even in the area, call it, got to be Noah's Ark. Quack like a duck, look like a duck, sound like a duck. So now, which they deal with, so a professed atheist, Dr. Akur, would later state in an interview with the Turkish media that it was Noah's Ark. When asked why, he simply replied, because there's no other explanation. So even though he admitted it got to be ark because ain't no other way you could reasonably say it's not an ark. It's a boat out here, 100 miles away from any sort of body of water. You got the proof showing that look at how the internal structure of it, the substructure, where here it is, we're pulling out metal rods out of it, you know, which we took personally to our own museum, so y'all can't have them, but we got them. But nevertheless, the internal structure of it, you know, the outer structure of everything we're able to pull, metal detectors is all showing. It's art, and look where it's located. How did it even get to this location? How would you even explain how it even got over here? So, had to have been through the flood. That's what he's given. So now, things were going incredibly well, Ron thought, when Dr. Akur presented him the copy of his book, Ancient Ruins of Turkey. He wrote to Mr. Ron Riot, "Congratulations for the successful discoveries." With a strong endorsement of the discovery, Mind Onler set about arranging a meeting for Ron later in Ankara, in which he would meet with all of the prominent or pertinent ministries at one time, explain his research. Things had come a long way in the last 7 months thanks to Jim Irwin. Jim had introduced him to the Golics, at whose house he had met both Orrin Baser and Mind Onler. And he had referred to Dave Faso to him, and although he had just met Dave, he could already tell that Dave meant business. Whatever he did, and Dave was already excited about the site, even though he hadn't seen it yet. That's all we needed from that. So this more was someone who just unrelated, just pretty much given in layman terms. Yeah, we know for a fact it's a ship. All right. So now, this is the area and the remains of Noah's house and tomb. Get more of that. So this is the location of it. So now remember, there was modern day Turkey, the Armenia. This is another one of Noah's house and tomb, which you can actually pull up on a satellite. So just like here. So Noah's house and tomb at that Dugabezat site, which is also Valley of the Eight, you know, Dunapar site, Doomsday Mountain. All right. So now, Ron Riot found 2 memorial plaques on which were carved in the stone, which represented the death of Noah on one board and the death of his wife on their second album, engraved with 8 crosses as symbols of Noah and his family. These plaques are present before the stone house of yesteryear. That's what they call it, yesteryear. House, and the plates were destroyed by vandals, and the graves that were discovered were burglarized. So now, evidence for man's first home in Turkey. All right. So Turkey has many archaeological sites, for one. Go ahead and read that, Kanash. Let me go ahead and get that for you. Oh, secondary tablet. Let's go back. Let's go ahead. Noah's home. Let's go ahead and get this first one. Go ahead, bam. Read the highlight report. Now read the whole thing. Actually, how we doing on time? All right, we can read the whole thing.
It all begins in Turkey. Here was where mankind was reborn, so to speak. Remnants of numerous and varied nations, which all were born when they were divided by the confounding of the language, can still be found here. Turkey has so many archaeological sites that no one has yet been able to count them. And an educated estimate is that there are some 40,000, ranging from scattered burials to the magnificent remains of sumptuous sites.
Sumptuous cities. So pretty much cities now buried. That's what you're dealing with. Read on.
Sumptuous cities. As the land bridge between Asia and Europe, Anatolia and Turkey has witnessed a unique procession of people and civilizations. In this very landscape, one finds a Neolithic settlement of Bronze Age cities, and in continuous chronology, the mingled artifacts of the Hittites and Assyrians, the Phrygians, the Lydians, the Iranian Greeks, the Persians, the Armenians, the Hellenistic Greeks, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Arabs, the Seljuks, the Frankish Crusaders, and the Ottoman Turks.
Cool. You know what? I am going to skip around through this. So now, I'm going to get the next part. The fertility of the Ararat Plain. All right? So now, the area where the ark came to rest was in a mountain range just a few miles south of Arxes Valley, or Ararat Plain. So the Aras, or Arxes River, runs through this valley. So beginning in Ezram, Turkey, west of Noah's home, and traveling east, and it then forms part of the Turkish-Russian and Turkish-Iranian border. The two volcanic Ararat mountains arose in this plain and can be seen from the site of the ark. As arising abruptly from the green, fertile valley, this area possesses a special fertility, so which is indicative of the special provisions God made for the first family in reestablishing life on the planet. In 1980, Ron photographed a roadside vegetable stand in the area near the ark where a local farmer was selling his cabbages, the largest we have ever seen anywhere. So you need to get plants and foods from seeds brought in the ark. So now, let's get Genesis chapter 6 and verse 21.
Genesis chapter 6.
The other thing they did bring, because some people, and all these things are all different arguments that people bring up. What did the animals eat? What did they bring? The scriptures tell you they brought food. What do you mean, what did they bring? They brought food. Get Genesis 6 and 21.
Genesis chapter 6 and verse 21. And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten.
He said, take thee unto thee of all food that is eaten. Read.
And thou shalt gather it to thee.
You shall gather it to you. Read.
And it shall be for food for thee and for them.
He said, look, make sure you gather food for you and for them. You think he just brought a whole bunch of animals and didn't bring no food for them? I don't know what y'all gonna eat for 40 days, but not me. Nah, the scripture, like Most High told him, bring food for you and for them. So yeah, but make sure these, and whatever it is, all them that meat and animals, yeah, that's all they food, but these are the ones to keep alive. So he knew, even the animal, because he said, what was the lion eating? He brought other gazelles for the lion to eat. But he said, look, but just make sure you keep these alive. So he had to bring food for every type of creature that was aboard. He couldn't just say, all right, well, this is just for me. No, the Most High told him, bring food for you and for them. Because the whole point was to keep them alive on the ark. What good would it have been if he just let everything die and just eat each other? He said, all right, well, I tried to keep, but, the alligator ate the hippo, and then, the spider ate the ant and the caterpillar, and, you have to keep everything alive in its own separate area. That's why the ark had to have so many stories, because he had to divide the living quarters for everything on board. So all this was planned and structured and thought out, not just something, all right, I'm just going to put everything on a boat in a big open room. No, it didn't work that way. That wouldn't be wise at all. So now, it said this indicates all the food for both the people and the animals was also plant life, food products, and that could be gathered that would last throughout the entire time they were in the ark. And from this food, they would have had seeds, even if they didn't bring seeds with them, which I suspect they did. And left the ark, they began to sow the seed that would produce food, and archaeological excavation revealed evidence which fit this scenario perfectly, that they brought foods and things of that nature. They brought seeds, things to plant, so it wasn't just everything they just kind of ate, like we just cooked some rice and that's all we got. So now, it says, I couldn't help but chuckle when I read the following concerning the evidence found in eastern and central Turkey. Paleobotany had provided evidence illuminating the earliest stage of the cultivation of emmer and ekron wheat and two-row barley with subsequent mutations resulting in improved strains. But still the problem of the ultimate geographical sources of the wild grains found in the earliest excavated settlements awaits solution. Even more important than the different varieties of timber available for building were the species of edible plants. Of these, of course, the most important are the cereals, but also most problematic because of the unsolved question of the origins. So that's what they're dealing with. So we're getting all these grains, but where did these grains actually come from? Because some of these things are coming from plants that we don't see produce or grow in the same way anymore. So where did they come from? But back from things during the pre-flood world. Just as I dealt with before, which a lot of the pre-flood world, you had a lot of anomalies, all right? Which would make sense when I cover Things like Dinosaurs and Man, we deal with like what is big and huge to where you would think, and bam. All right, so knowing that a basketball is a big ball, but this we deal with relativity, all right? So, but this one is a small ball because it's always relative to what? You always consider one thing small or big because you have something else to compare it to. I know a golf ball is a small ball because I have like a basketball, a soccer ball, a football to compare it to say this is a big ball. Same thing when I get into the world of atom and you deal with, all right, today we know these are small turtles because we can say it's small relative to the hand. All right, that's how relativity works. Then we say this is a bigger turtle but still small considered to the turtles we were just looking at. But we would say that is a large turtle, that is a huge turtle, that's a big turtle. They can both sit on that turtle and get around. All right, so nevertheless, but when we deal with the word of atom, big had a whole different definition. This was big back then. That was a big turtle. But then again, that doesn't mean that was the biggest. That's just the biggest we found so far. That's not the extent. That just gives that was the norm back then. And that was the norm of everything. I'll show you pictures of spiders, centipedes, like everything was huge. Birds, you think you ain't, like birds the size of buses, like birds like huge. Everything was big. Even us, we were big. Adam wasn't no little man like us. Ain't no one on the face of this earth the size of what Adam and Eve was. We were all little compared. Everything was big. Like everything was much bigger than this world. Everything is small now. Even like us, we getting smaller and weaker. But everything back then was on a whole different level. Everything was strong. The way you see like little lions and tigers and bears, they're small compared to back then. A bear then was different than the size of a bear now. A lion then was different than the size of a lion now. A man then was different than the size of a man now. You like looking like a little man probably like a Matazak. You know, you probably like a little man. You know, he's a big man for us today. That man, you know, big, he huge. You know, but back then big had a whole different meaning. It's like, we look at today like, man, that's a big turtle shell because you don't see no turtles that big. We're gonna find a turtle that big. So just things of that nature, which we'll get back into. So now, and that's what all this information here is going back with proof, dinosaurs and man, and even a lot of weird animals and all sort of, even humans, you know, and all sorts of stuff, even human fossils that go back to the Jurassic period and Cretaceous period and all sorts of things that scientists have to explain and try to weasel their way out of. But let's go back to Noah's home. So just want to go ahead and get that so I like my portfolio better because I can move more freely. All right. So now, going back to what we're dealing with, even more important than the different varieties of timber available for building were the species of edible plants. So now it says of these, of course, the most important are the cereals, but also most problematic because the unsolved question is of their origin. So we're finding these cereals, but where'd they come from? They don't grow here anymore. So it had to have come from an old world, the old world before the flood. Now skip around for the highlights. So recent work has shown a large percentage of the plants which are endemic. That is, confined to Turkey, meaning things that only grow in this particular area, in this particular region. So that is particularly true of the Taurus Ranges, where the Iranian-Turian and the Mediterranean botanical zones meet. The last quote is especially exciting, for it tells us that in the general region of south-central Turkey, there's a large number of plants that are found only there. So due to the fertility of that land. Skipping down, Noah even planted fruits which today still grow in the cold climate, which would make sense because when you deal with the Ice Age was a product of the water receding off of the earth from after the flood. There was an Ice Age, but it wasn't like this 1,000,000 or 100,000 years. It came from the water that receded off the earth that remained in a lot of places. So when people look at global warming, that is water that is coming from the ice caps from the flood event that is still evaporating or decreasing from the flood. Not something random to where all of a sudden it's just been melting and we don't know why it's melting. It's been melting because it's all still coming from the flood because the flood didn't happen that long ago because the earth is still young. The earth ain't millions or 100,000 years old. The earth is less than 12,000 years old. So, and especially when we look in the flood, that wasn't something that happened like, 100,000, 50,000, 10, 20,000 years ago. You're only looking at a few thousand years. That's why history, like I showed you during that class, I'm doing it before, and I go with science and more with Genesis. That's why history doesn't go back history only goes back a couple thousand years, a few thousand years when you're dealing with BC. So not AD. You're only looking at, we only got like historically like proven, we could only go back like hardcore evidence back with the BCs. Okay, we could push it hardcore 1600 BC. You know, we can push that. But the reality of it, they really just know from like the Greeks. That's just really it. We could push 16. Anyone pushing dates past 16, they're just kind of winging it from these things. We believe it to be 2005, 2006. They ain't got nothing, no 3000. They ain't got nothing. They try to push that, maybe, but they don't really have nothing that go back that far. They just kind of push. And before that, everything else scientists just pull out the crack of their butt. Like literally, we just pull dates. They just guessing. We just guess, like literally. So ain't nothing going back that far. So now, like I said, all right, reading the highlights. It says, to this day, Turkey has fruits and thrive in spite of its cold climates. They got apples, plums, apricots, peaches, mulberries are common in the eastern highlands, including the districts around Lake Van, where they are hardy enough to survive the severe winters. Now, why is that? Because the temperature was more so cold after the flood, because all the water cooled down everything, and then you had a lot of freezing in a lot of areas. So that actually froze a lot of the landscape, that actually made it to where a lot of things growing had a ability to thrive in colder climates because they were surviving in colder climates. So now it's when you deal with a lot of the histories and things that man say, okay, well, there seem to be, you know, certain things that actually took place. You know, the scripture did with that. Yeah, these things did take place, but not necessarily completely in the way that man says, as if, well, there was a part of the Cretaceous period, the Jurassic period. No, all these things were just buried on top of each other, and you're just going through the layers buried on top of each other as if these are totally different periods when all these things existed at the same time and just were buried rapidly at the same time. And that's more information I'll bring out later on. All right, so now, skipping around. So remember Noah's vineyard in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 20, as it deals with, and Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, all right, which they deal with that he was planting. So yet vineyards are usually found in warm climates, certainly not in regions with such dreadfully cold winters as eastern Turkey. Because then and even now, Turkey is a colder climate. How did he have such a thriving vineyard? Because they're still seeing today, contrary to what you may see in other areas, they still got plenty of fruits, apples and pears and oranges, oh my, that are thriving in cold climates like it's nothing. Because that was the thing that, hey, we were thriving and living in that area for a time, before we had more children and expanded outwardly. So now, as it deal with, the vine is a hardy plant at home in much of Antillia, so much of Turkey. Transcaucasia, in the earliest found specimens in forms of many food plants, are found in the ancient settlements extending outward from the area of the Ark and Ran site for Babel in south central Turkey. So now, Turkey even has some plants today which are found nowhere else on earth. How can these things be explained? There's no explanation except for the Genesis account. So now, you deal with the advanced technical knowledge of Noah and his family. The first people to inhabit the earth after the flood, Noah and his immediate family, were not primitive. And you deal with more of the excavation that they found, the tool that they had. So primitive being like ape-like, they tried to still caveman, they didn't know nothing, like they had knowledge. So remember, he just built the ark to maintain, like he had knowledge, our people weren't dumb. They possessed the vast knowledge of the pre-flood world. Because that's what we forget. There was a whole world prior to the flood. Like a whole vast, like empires. There were like cities and kingdoms and people living. That's why when I brought out before in the couple weeks ago with the pyramid, how do you think pyramid ended up underwater? Them areas flooded. Because you had, like I'll get back to in the Genesis account, you had the rain that came down, but you also had the fountains of the deep. The Most High had water under the surface of the earth that broke open and flooded upward, which is how you got the Grand Canyon formed, with where all that water went and where did all that sediment go. That's what made Death Valley and a lot of those deserts, all that expanded upward and out and caused all that sand, all that dry, and all that to just kind of accumulate in that particular area. All right, so that's more so for another, because all these lessons, all this knowledge, it all intertwines. All right, so you can't miss it from the other stuff that I've been telling you in other classes. It's all cumulative. All right, so all these things go in tandem. So remember everything from the stuff from Egypt, everything the stuff with Genesis and the science. Remember the stuff from this, because it's all going to go back in tandem. Anything you forget, just go back, watch the video. All right, so now, going back to this, so one of the most exciting discoveries for Ron Wyatt was working on Noah's Ark with the large amount of metal he found in the remains of the ship. So, let me go back. So now, with the advanced technical knowledge. So now, the only material they would have had at first to work with would have been the thing that they brought with them on the ark. They may have had even cannibalized parts of the ark to actually make other things that they needed, until the trees had time to grow large enough to use for timber, and they found natural sources for metals and substances which to fashion tools such as obsidian. One of the most exciting discoveries Ron, when he was working on Noah's Ark, was the large amount of metal he had found in the remains of the ship. Skipping down, just reading the highlights. Ron believed they used the metals from the ballast and perhaps even some of the metal fittings and objects on the ark to make their implements. Of course, this theory would only be worthy of consideration if everything was found in metal making in the area. So let's get that. And more on this actually later with some marks. So now, earliest sighted metalworking was just a few miles from Noah's home, because they actually did find that. Noah's home and grave, and the advanced technology of metals and glass. So a few miles from the site of the ark in the Arkansas Valley, so it's a vast complex of extremely ancient stone fences radiating outward from an ancient stone house. Behind this complex to the north is a very ancient stone altar located upon a ridge between two hills. So you have this, an ancient fenced area, an ancient house, and an ancient altar. So right near the ark. Coincidence? I think not. So in front of his house, Ron found two tombstones which indicated that they were marking the graves of Noah and his wife. And therefore, we believe this was actually Noah's home. Skipping down, reading the highlights. Here within a few miles of Noah's home, it is what has been termed one of, if not the, oldest metallurgical sites ever found. Analysis of copper found there showed 14 different alloys, including tin, lead, antimony, and zinc. The sophistication of this metalworking center has fascinated archaeologists, as this site is termed indeed unique in its complexity and long life. So this metallurgy center is quite sophisticated. Clay pipes inserted into the furnace, so for use with bellows, was also found. Likewise, of this phase at Messamar are phosphorus briquettes. Phosphorus were used in the smelting of casterite to obtain tin. So our people understood the making and fashioning of different metals and different alloys, how to make copper, how to make zinc, how to make these different, like they understood and had this knowledge information, which showed that they were working, able to do with the complexity of different alloys or metals found in this particular area. So even as it says, earliest bronze making and glass making. Archaeological sites are excavated to discover the sequence of materials. Those found directly above the virgin soil with nothing below them represent the earliest occupation level. At Massamar, the earliest phase yielded bronze slag. So a discovery which continues to puzzle archaeologists, as they believe man progressed very slowly through the various stages of knowledge, where this information is saying man already had this information and knowledge. So if we're saying and thinking, well, man progressed slowly, how this information that we're finding in these archaeological sites showing contrary that man already had this? We trying to say that, oh, well, man had to discover how to make fire and make wheel and, make wood and hammer. Where this is showing man already had the knowledge of hammer and metals and things of that nature to make this. Not that they had to discover it, but that's because Noah's already hundreds of years old when he even made the ark. He's like, man, I knew how to work this stuff back when I was 50 years old. Of course I'm going to know when I'm hundreds of years old, and teach my kids. So, different world back then. So now, yet here's evidence that man appeared on the scene with tremendous technical knowledge, producing an alloy, even they're finding bronze, which required tin and sometimes includes zinc for increased hardness. So meaning they're finding bronze to where you don't just wait, okay, this is just bronze. No, bronze is a combination of other metals to make it. That how did they have this knowledge to combine these metals to make this metal? That's what we're looking at. And not only did they produce sophisticated metals here, they also produce glass. You find it where we thinking glass is a new thing, like all of a sudden we drinking glass cups. I'm like, no, I said, man, we've been knew how to make glass. We've been had glass containers and things like this up here on the desk. Like, we've been knew how to make glass. That ain't new. But now, so it says that not only did they produce sophisticated metals here, they produced glass. Glass making also flourished at Messamar, as indicated by 6 types of metallurgical material, including zinc and manganese, alloyed in different ways to make different colors. They had different colors of glass, different colors of metal, things of that nature. So now, they also had, skipping down, several large ballast samples from the whole of the ark that Ron had tested showed over 85% manganese. So now, reading the highlights, Ron has documented the use of very large rivets on the ark. It seems reasonable to expect that Noah and his sons would have passed the usage of rivets on to their descendants, and that is exactly what the evidence shows. At Amarana's Gora, north of the area of the ark, a cemetery revealed pottery with knobs along the top of the shoulder that seemed to imitate rivets. So now, it said, but should there be any doubt, another very puzzling group of artifacts came to light in 1974 and 1975. And one interesting feature is that two of the swords are almost 36 inches long. They found swords. They found knives, but they found swords too. Like, damn, they was making swords and all that too. They had knives and daggers. They had swords. They had everything else. How are they making this? So, which would have been difficult to wield with one hand. So it says, but the feature that, and mind you, think about it, it said, which would have been difficult to wield with one hand. So I said, but the feature that interests us now is the fact that these have been dated to very early time by the archaeologists and use rivets to attach the handle. In fact, all of the knives use rivets. So just having to wear these rivets on pottery, swords, knives. So, and even then, it was showing how, they had to be strong too. But now it says, once again, so reading the highlights, as we explained earlier, the Ararat Plain or Oxus Valley is about 80 to 90 miles long, beginning a little west of Mount Ararat and extending through present-day Iran into the USSR. So now, skipping down, Abraham's family lived in the area just south of Babel. So now, skipping down. So next biblical event in Genesis is the selection of Abraham, to be the father of the chosen people. And we discover that he is living in Ur of the Chaldees, called Urfa today, which is within 100 miles of Babel. So now, skipping down, the evidence shows conclusively that Abraham's family settled in the region a little south of Ron's site for Babel, in the area of the Euphrates Loop, in the tributary of the Balkai River. Surag, Abraham's great-grandfather's name, today called Surak, is located halfway between the Euphrates and Haran town, a town called Nahor, which is named after Nahor, the name of Abraham's grandfather, as well as a brother, is known from both the Cappadocian tablets and the Mari text to be in the same region. The name of Abraham's father Terah is preserved at Tel Satura, the ruin of Terah in the Bilgah Valley. So they're saying everything named in this area is all named after Abraham's father, grandfather, great-grandfather. So that history is all still there, and it's even embedded in some of the tablets that have been found in that area. So now, what is remarkable is that all these geographical names are found in the district of Haran. According to the biblical traditions, it is precisely in this region that Abraham's family stayed, which we're finding. So now, let's get, let's go. So now, you also find Nakhishavan in Soviet Armenia, founded by Noah. So now, numerous Armenian traditions describe the founding of the city Nakachifin to Noah. Skipping around. However, it seems very logical that as the patriarch of the family, Noah would have traveled with his younger family members as they explored the region in the search of suitable areas to establish new settlements, then returning to his own home. Therefore, the traditions that state that he founded Nekavin could be based on actual fact. William von Rusabark of France, who spent Christmas Day 1254 AD in this city, wrote about his travels in this region for the French king and related the following. Near the city, Nakhavin, are mountains in which they say that Noah's Ark rests. And there are two mountains, the one greater than the other. And the ark's flows at their base. And there's a town there called Semanum, which interpreted means 8. So even then saying the town there, which lines up because even then they're calling it, back there in his account, they're naming it 8, the place of the 8. So, and they say that it was thus called from the 8 persons who came out of the ark and who built it on the greater mountain. So now, this account is interesting because it does contain some very important statements which indicate that the people were aware of the true site of the resting place of the ark. Notice that he said the ark rests in the mountains, plural, not on the greater mountain. Skip it down, which those mountains were Greater and Lesser Ararat, which are located next to Arxis River. Skipping down, the town called Kazan, where Noah and his wife were buried, and where most of the anchor stones are found, is not on the mountain, but several miles from the base of it. So a written account of Noah's Ark. So now, moving on. But where are all the early metal objects? Skipping down. The metals were a precious commodity for a very long time. Some even today. When people moved, they left their pottery behind because it was easy to make a new batch after they reached their new location, and it was too bulky to carry or to try to carry on long trips. This is not to say that they left every single piece, but perhaps they used some to carry supplies in. But for the most part, pottery would be the objects left behind, along with other implements made of plentiful materials such as animal bone and obsidian. And these things are found in abundance in ancient sites. But metal implements would be considered very valuable and would therefore be carried along when people move. For that reason, we kind of expect to find metal objects in these early sites. Even if an implement or tool is considered obsolete or new ones are desired, the metal from the old objects could be reshaped into the new items because you can recycle it. No different skipping down when Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem in 586 BC, he collected all the metal objects as spoils of war. So it makes sense to find mostly pottery. Skipping down for the highlights. So now, for all practical purposes, mankind began again here. So it began again there. Noah's descendants were born there. Their advanced knowledge came from Noah and his sons who brought it from the pre-flood world. Because although his descendants, they had seen the past world before the flood and had that knowledge of that world to pass down to their descendants. And from the region, mankind spread across the face of the earth. Evidences indicates that this Arxis Valley is the original home from which this culture subsequently expanded in all directions. But now you got, lastly, the rapidly growing population of predatory animals. So now, reading the highlights. It says, after the flood, Noah and his family faced a world completely destroyed. In this new, ragged and barren world, they had the task of breeding the animals from the ark and raising the first crops. With such a diversity of animals breeding freely in the region, many of which were predatory and quite dangerous to man and other animals, it would be extremely important for families and communities to remain together in order to provide protection for each other as well as for their flocks and their herds. So also many ancient homes have been found which had no doorway but were entered through the roof by ladders, which also could have been for this very reason to stay away from so many of those predatory animals. So also, many buried their dead below a stone slab under the floor of their houses, which could very well have been to protect them from being dug up and eaten by animals. Just looking at the culture of that time. Now reading on, the rapid growth of the predators must have made life very dangerous for Noah's family. The situation was still the same during the time of the children of Israel were entering the promised land in Exodus 23 and 29. So he says, I will not drive, which you also read that scripture, Exodus 23 and 29, I will not drive them, the Hivite, the Hittite, and the Canaanite out from before thee in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field multiply against thee. Because remember, at the time, they were still dealing with everything from bears and dinosaurs and dragons, oh my, like all those things were there. So they were still dealing with those particular types of animals and creatures that existed in that land because dinosaurs still were a common thing that lived amongst with people. There are a lot of predatory animals. So now, it said they have also found teeth and other fragments from the skeletons of hippopotamus, elephants antiques, an extinct type of elephant, horse, cave bear, and hyena. So these were not fossils, they were post-flood animals. They had much more to contend with than we can imagine. And now you also had Nimrod's influence felt even in this century, famed reputation as the great hunter. One author who traveled much of Middle East in 1948 writes about a tale told from him by Sir Leonard Woolley, the famed excavator of Ur, Ur, the land of the Chaldees. Which he quotes, he once told me that the grandfather trusted overseer of his had killed a lion. Here and there in the foothill region of northern Syria, lions survived well into the second half of the 19th century. If a man wished to acquire fame and fortune, and also if he was strong and somewhat foolhardy, he would announce that he would challenge a lion to single combat on a certain date. Skipping down, he thenceforth had the appellation of lion killer added to his name, and never had to do any more work, as lion killers were entertained at the public expense for the rest of their lives. So now, already dealt with Mount Ararat, things of that nature. Cool, we covered that. We kind of go down, this will be the last thing I'll kind of cover. Yeah, kind of get some of the last stuff. All right, I'd always say, think for yourself. All right, leading archaeologists and scientists say that the Earth is a million years old and that you and I descended from a monkey. So it is our policy to only ask experts in the various fields to state facts about the evidence, such as the fact that there's organic carbon in the specimens from the Ark in an amount consistent with the presence of once living matter, such as decayed wood. We don't ask anyone to say this is Noah's Ark, we just want them to look for the evidence. So there comes a time when people have to learn to think for themselves. Skipping down. So reading the highlights. Simple-minded people in Christ's time who accepted him as the Messiah based on their own decision, based on what they knew to be true. They didn't need the learned men and religious leaders to make their decisions for them. Skipping down. Do we really believe that we must have a scientist who is trained in and ingrained in evolutionary science to tell us what is truth? Skipping down. One scientist that Ron took to the site went on the television and said he believed this was most likely Noah's Ark. In fact, he said that he personally believed that it was. Yet, he later told Ron that the facility he worked for told him he could either work for them or work on Noah's Ark. Today, this man is a vehement opponent of the site. Did the facts change? No, only a statement of the opinion. This is a decision that the common folk will have to make for themselves. So now, fact. All right, fact attained by managed results. If the tests show evidence of decayed or petrified wood, that is fact. If the metal detector scans show the presence of iron at regularly spaced intervals, that is a fact. There is scientific fact, then there is a theory. The boat-shaped object is shaped like a ship and is the size of the biblical ark. It is translated into Royal Egyptian cubits, this is fact. It contains metal at even intervals, this is a fact. Theory is that it is an old replica of the ark built in the time of Constantine, or that it is an old fortress. It is also theory that it is Noah's Ark. Circumstantial evidence, like a court case, you decide after sufficient evidence is presented what it is. Just be very careful to separate the theory from the fact. We believe this is Noah's Ark, and we are so convinced based on the tremendous amount of evidence that we will state our belief without hesitation. Others will state without hesitation that it is not the ark. It will ultimately come down to the fact of whether you believe it is within the realm of possibility for something to look like a duck, quack like a duck, give birth to baby ducks, swim like a duck, and yet not be a duck. So, and thanks to David Faso for the metaphor. And David Faso, remember, was one of the ones who actually did some of the research on the actual metal detectors. So now, so understand the remains of the ark. The entire key to understand the evidence which confirm that this site does in fact contain the remains of Noah's Ark is understand the condition of the remains. The world has a preconceived notion of what they accept, and that is, they're looking at a recognizable wooden ship still intact after 4,300 years. And the ship must be on the volcanic mountain known as Mount Ararat. The concept of the ark's appearance has been further enhanced by those who interpreted the fact that the ark had rooms to mean that it had to look like a barge-shaped houseboat instead of a ship. This concept has been based on the many claimed sightings of the ark on the Mount Ararat, and not a single sighting is accompanied by any evidence. So now the ark, not barge-shaped. First of all, a barge-shaped vessel cannot survive on the open seas. Any sailor can tell you that. In fact, the idea is preposterous. The oil tankers of today, which traverse the open seas, have a hull which is not flat on the bottom, but instead is rounded. Skipping down. If you want to research the subject yourself, go to the library and look up ships and shipbuilding and or other fluid dynamics or hydrodynamics. The boat-shaped object is not barge-shaped and displays the shape of a sea-going vessel. This is barge-shaped. It doesn't show a flat bottom. So it doesn't show a flat bottom with chimes. It shows a rounded bottom. Now, next thing, the ark would not have survived on Mount Ararat. So if the ark was a reality then, so would the flood, which destroyed the entire face of the earth. And this means that the ark, if it survived until today, is the oldest structure on earth. Considering the fragile state of the wooden homes that were built in even the last century, could we expect to find an intact ark or even any remains at all? Certainly not in the ever-moving glaciers on Mount Ararat, which continue to flow and grind everything in their path into minute pieces. Even if an object survived in the glaciers, could it survive the incredible blast of the past eruptions, the most recent of which blew out an entire section of the mountain? Again, go to the library and research volcanoes and glaciers and read up on Mount St. Helens. So now, despite the scholarly consensus, the mountains of Ararat, or the book of Genesis, did not refer to specifically Mount Ararat, it's been widely accepted in Christianity as the resting place of Noah's Ark. Many people thinking Mount Ararat instead upon the mountains of Ararat. It's the principal national symbol of Armenia and has been considered a sacred mountain by Armenians. It is featured prominently in Armenian literature and art and as an icon for Armenian eruditism. Along with Noah's Ark, it is depicted in the coat of arms in Armenia. That we deal with, Mount Ararat is a snow-capped and dormant compound volcano in the extreme east of Turkey. It consists of two major volcanic cones, Greater Ararat, which is the highest peak in Turkey in the Armenian Plateau, with an elevation of 5,137 meters, or 6,854 feet, and Little Ararat with an elevation of 389.6 meters, 12,782 feet. The Ararat Massif is about 35 kilometers, or 22 miles wide at ground base. So now, how was the Ark preserved? The evidence found at the boat-shaped object, which we will, in complete confidence, refer to as the Ark, showed that the Ark was only preserved at all because it was covered in lava flow, which effectively sealed it in a sort of time capsule. However, the mountain it is on is not volcanic. The evidence showed that the lava resulted from the eruption of a volcano many miles to the south in present-day Iran. But now many people have questions with that because once again it's going to come, well, if it was lava, why didn't it just burn up? Not even understanding how the dynamics of it works. The lava from that mountain was ejected in the air and carried to the top of the ridge above the Ark's present location. The existence of this volcano is proved by the broken stele Ron found in 1984 upon this ridge, which showed the unique limestone ridge with the volcanic position next to it in the south. Today, this volcano is collapsed and cannot be seen except from the top of the ridge, not from the viewpoint of the artist who inscribed the stele. Now the Ark covered in lava. The lava reached the top of the ridge and began to travel down the side of the mountain, covering the Ark. The path of lava can be distinctly seen in the present mud flow area. Once again, the path of the lava can be distinctly seen in the present mud flow area. One way mud flows are formed is when water is trapped over a long period of time in slowly decaying lava. Then, when the lava finally deteriorates into soil, the tremendous amount of water captured and retained in it begins to flow, sometimes quite rapidly and catastrophically, which is called a mudslide. The weight of the tremendous amount of molten rock or lava flowing upon the Ark caused the two top decks to collapse. If that is so, why wasn't the Ark burned up? There are two possibilities as to why it wasn't burned up. The first is this: assuming the lava was the type which would have caused a wooden object to catch on fire. That's one. If the Ark was completely covered by lava rapidly, this would cut off oxygen supply and combustion would not be possible. All right, lava does not always burst into flame, so to speak. It would have just capacitated over it and stored it. So now, but supposing it was covered more slowly, it is a documented fact that lava does not always cause combustion. I will use a quote from a good old evolutionary science book. It might be supposed that the high temperatures of the lava would go off of an enormous amount of heat. This is not so. However, and it is quite usual for a flow to pass through a forest or town without causing a fire. So just because you see lava does not necessarily mean that you will actually see a burning fire. All right? So now, one flow from Parketon even piled up against oaks and cottonwoods without destroying them. How can we explain this anomaly of high lava temperature and absence of fire and flames? To begin with, lava consists of a vitreous mass, which is a poor conductor of heat. It also cools quickly at the surface, becoming covered with a crust which in some measure prevents further heat radiation from inside the mass. This is a lava flow has, as it were, a constant forming insulating case around its molten interior, so that the front of the flow is preceded by a protecting crust. The New Larousse Encyclopedia of the Earth, published by Hamlin Publishing Group, Limited, copyright 1961, revised edition 1972, page 158. So it doesn't always have to end in a fire or something like that. Either way you choose, the fact that the Ark was covered by lava does not in any way mean that it had to be burned up. The fact that the deck seemed to be uniformly collapsed indicates that it was covered rapidly. You don't get an unevenness to where one side collapsed, other side didn't. The whole thing collapsed together. So now, the fact that the deck seemed to be uniformly collapsed indicated it was covered rapidly, which it would have cut off the oxygen supply. We do have specimens which display some burning, but it seems to be very limited in extent. Now, the ark revealed when lava deteriorated. The lava covered the ark and sealed it in an airtight capsule. So why is it now visible? Why isn't it still encased in the lava? Because lava deteriorates and breaks down over time into fertile soil, which you can always see. That's why a place like Hawaii is so fertile, because lava is very fertile. So lava has a lot of minerals that enrich the soil. So now, and this is just, once again, all basic stuff that someone could just kind of research on their own, that this all helps add into the different parts of evidence to deal with the whole situation. So now, we do expect we display some burden, but it seemed to be very limited in extent. So now, the ark revealed when lava deteriorated. Lava covered the ark and sealed it in an airtight capsule. So why is it now visible? Why isn't it still encased in the lava? Because lava deteriorates and breaks down over time in fertile soil. Let's again go to the same book we referred to above. The soils which develop from the decomposition of the lavas, cinders, and ashes are exceptionally rich in potash, lime, and phosphates. Many districts of the world with a high agricultural population owe the richness of their land to volcanic material. All right, those things are very good for the soil. Now, Hawaii is an excellent example of this. Their wonderful soil, which produces the beautiful exotic flowers we associate with this paradise, are a result of the decayed lava, so rich in the nutrients necessary for perfect growth. But it takes lava a very long time to deteriorate. But how long depends on the type of lava, etc., and the type of material. So we cannot know exactly how long the ark was covered. However, over time, as the lava began its deterioration process, it was no longer airtight. The remains were fossilized. The ark is situated on a mountainside and its slopes. The front end is about a 6,350-foot elevation, while the lower end is about a 6,250-foot elevation. The lava deteriorated over time, and being no longer airtight, it was no longer watertight. So now, skipping down, this means that as the lava began to deteriorate, this water began to flow through the material which covered the ark. Skipping down, as the water slowly seeped over the preserved structure of the ark, it began to wash away minute particles of the wood and metal fittings of the structure. So this is where you start to get that mineral displacement that I was talking about before, mixing of actual minerals due to that water placement. So this took place on a molecular level. Molecule by molecule was washed away, but as each molecule broke loose and washed away with the water, it left a hole the exact size of the molecule that had broken loose, which was then taken in its place. And that's how more of the petrification started to happen. So which I'll deal with later on when we deal with fossils and all those things, that fossils don't just come out of nowhere. If a dog dies outside right there, he ain't finna just become a fossil, even if no one decides to bury him. What usually happens, everything starts to break down, even the bones break down, even with us. You don't just get a fossil just because something dies. It's unique conditions that cause something to become fossilized or petrified. So the process I'm describing is called petrification or mineral replacement. For an object to become petrified, two things are always required. First, note this because it is going to come up again, that the object be buried rapidly. Second, that it have water flowing through it, or over it, or around it. If it is not airtight and has no water flowing over it, it suffers from decay and is not preserved. Because remember, fossils, petrification is a way to preserve what is actually there. Other than that, it's just going to decay and rot away. So petrified literally means turn to stone. As the water flowed down the mountain into the soil and then reached the ark, the structured members near the top were petrified with molecules of the substances in the earth above the ark, which were minerals. As the water flowed over the midsection of the ark, it had picked up molecules from the ark structures it had flowed over prior to reaching the midsection. Therefore, it began to be petrified with substances from its own structure, in addition to the substances in the soil above it. At least, that is what should have occurred if the object really is the ark. The evidence at the site shows that this is exactly what happened. The deck timber which Ron obtained from the approximate midsection of the ship contained over 13% iron. Iron which came from the metal fittings of the structure above the midsection. The majority of molecules involved in the petrification process are molecules from the natural substances in the earth and the lava. The first analysis Ron had performed in his specimens from the site showed an approximate 51% silica content. That's fine. The Encyclopedia Britannica, 1985, Education Volume 19, page 506, under volcano states, magma consists of a molten silicate mass within the earth of various composition. In fact, all petrified objects contain a great deal of silica simply due to its abundance in the soil. And this is what you're dealing with. When something actually becomes, like let's say a log, and you'll see this information again, but it's buried, you buried on top of it, you got mud and ash and water and sand, and all the water penetrates, mixed with the silica, you get mineral displacement that actually happens as the water and the silica penetrate the log, and the minerals from the log are swapped with the minerals of the water that's penetrating it in the silica in the water. So once again, petrification process. The logs were buried, the cell structure of the trees were infiltrated with minerals and lodged in a sedimentary source such as sandstone, siltstone, and clay formed from weathered volcanic ash, a key ingredient of the petrification process. The Channel Formation located in the four corners of the area of the United States reveals layers of 400 feet of sediment that were deposited by rivers that originated from volcanic mountain ranges. As the volcanic ash decomposed, chemicals were released, and with the aid of water, which permeated the wood and formed into quartz, crystals eventually turned the wood into stone. Like you see here, this is petrified wood. This is wood that has now been turned into stone. That's what you're looking at, all right? So wood that has been turned into stone. Even formation like a fossil, like with fish, fossils are formed in a number of different ways, but most are formed when a plant or animal dies in a watery environment. Note, watery environment, and it's buried in mud and silt. So soft tissues quickly decompose, leaving the hard bones or shells behind. Over time, sediment builds over the top and hardens into rock. As the encased bone decay, minerals seep in, replacing the organic material cell by cell in a process called petrification. So this is a piece of wood from the actual ark. So it's a piece of petrified wood. So now, the surefire test. But there's one substance that is not found in natural materials. Skimming down. Compounds of carbon can be analyzed to determine whether they are composed of matter that was non-organic or organic, which means it can be determined whether they were once living matter or not. If object was organic once living or not is determined by its carbon content, whether it contains organic carbon or not. Skimming down. So knew that it looked like a piece of wood turned to stone or petrified. So they analyzed it and found that it did contain inorganic carbon, so 0.0081%. However, it also contained 7,119% organic carbon, which is over 100 times more the amount of inorganic carbon, showing it to actually be something that once contained actual life, that it was actually part of a tree or wood. Every petrified object ever found that was once living, tree branch, bone, seashell, etc., will show organic carbon in its analysis. So the deck timber specimen was once composed of living matter. Since it didn't look like a bone or a shell, we feel pretty confident in stating that it's petrified wood. So it's organic material. As we've shown here, this piece is actually organic material. It's not a rock. It's wood. But it's petrified wood. So now, dealing with where did the iron come from? In order for there to be such a high percentage of iron in the petrified wood, the water which affected its petrification had to pass over a large amount of iron prior to reaching the petrifying object. The soil above the ark does not contain that much iron. One controlled specimen taken from the area outside the ark, but within 50 or so yards, revealed a 0.54% iron and 0.77% iron ferric oxide content. If we were to believe that the petrified wood received its iron content from the naturally occurring iron in the region above the ship, we would have to believe that the entire iron content of the region was gathered up by the waters and deposited only in the petrified wood. In other words, it's impossible with how it was done. So where did the high amount of iron come from found in the ark? Because it couldn't have came from such high contents of outside or surrounding the ark. So like I said, moving on. Large amounts of metals in petrified wood could only come from one place, from the water passing over a large amount of metal in the ark structure. Metal, which we now know composes the thousands of fittings which held the timbers together, like the radars were showing. as we went over earlier. Now, the ark hidden for many, many years. And so the ark remained hidden for many, many years, its presence unknown since its being covered by the lava flow, which incidentally carried it down the mountain until it was impaled on a massive outcropping of bedrock. Late 1950, the high-altitude photo taken during the NATO survey showed this incredible outline of a ship high on a mountainside in a mud flow. The first expedition to the site in 1960 didn't see anything they could recognize as being a man-made object because all that was visible was the decayed lava, which was now a layer of rich, fertile soil, which is why I explained why it's so covered in dirt. So now, here, and there a rock protruded through the earth, which was actually petrified wood. So the rock that they saw was actually petrified wood. So now we deal with truth shall spring out of the earth, the 1978 earthquake. Then in late 1978, an earthquake caused the soil surrounding the mysterious shape to fall away from the sides, giving the effect that the capsule had literally popped up from the earth. With the soil removed from the sides, the object took an even more of the recognizable shape of a ship, which I showed you earlier. So now reading down, but why are they empty? What happened to the ribbed timbers if they were petrified? The answer is due to the effect of weathering. So identification by what is not present. Let's again return to our favorite science book, the LaCruz Encyclopedia, from which we quote above. Whenever rocks are exposed to attack by weathering process, loose material forms, sometimes into large quantities. Mass wasting is almost inseparable from weathering, and the many other agents of graduation, water, for example, aids its work considerably. In mountain areas, daily freeze and thaw action of frost wedging and plays its part. Fissures in the rocks fill with water which freezes and expands at night. Under the pressure of the innumerable wedges of ice, the rock cracks. Next morning, the ice melts in the sun and no longer supports the rock fragments, many of which roll down the slope to join other rocks in debris, which we're dealing with. 1960 Turkish team, 1979 expedition after the earthquake. So now, this is more updated that actually looks more like the actual ship. So that's what you're looking at, all right? So now on that note, that's enough covering. Time is 6:31. I'm out of time. I'm done. More as we cover other histories, things of that nature. I'll do a series on the Nephilim and all sorts of those things. But that's just some of the evidence. We're halfway through, some of that evidence. But nevertheless, get the idea with the evidence concerning Noah's Ark. So there's a documentary, Research Ron Wyatt Museum. There's a book out that has a lot of this information. You can read it from his book, but nevertheless, we'll cover that, and we'll cover more of some of this other Israelite archaeology, Israelites in Egypt, and all sorts of other sciences and things of that nature. So all in due season. Young Earth, which deals with a lot of the things I'll deal with, like cold and articulated fossils and polystrate fossils and all different layers. And like that hat I was talking about, rapid petrification. So these things and all sort of stuff, speleotherms. Nevertheless, that concludes our lesson for the day. Most are willing. Hope you got something, learned something. Anything you missed, go back, refer to the notes. So with that, go ahead and close out the lesson. Announcements. Any announcements? We have the mic. Go ahead and go ahead.
Right. All right, so unless Kabash is here, Tila Recycling, you guys know the drill. If you guys can keep gathering them and bringing them, and if you know people that absolutely cannot bring them here, refer them to me by number, and I will go to them. But if you can, try to bring them or convince them to bring the recycles here so that we can continue with the Tila program that we got going on True Nation. Also, be sure to check the bulletin board for businesses that are going on, obviously outside the Sabbath. Mine in particular, Brothers Martial Arts, if you guys have interest, let me know. Yes.
For the last two and a half years, we've been talking about Tila and the recycles, but it was called to my attention today, and I've always mentioned the money to motivate the people to bring recycles, but it was called to my attention today that maybe I shouldn't address it that way. So I'm not going to mention money anymore because it's always on the Sabbath when I mention money in reference to recycles, trying to motivate the people to keep bringing recycles. So I won't be saying that anymore. But I will say, you know, if you keep remembering Tila and keep bringing the recycles, but I'm not permitted to tell you anymore how much we made or how much recycle that the money brought in. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Any other announcements? All right, go ahead. Pass the mic, please.
Shalom, everybody. So these are our announcements for today. For True Nation members, please be aware of the upcoming events and plan your schedules accordingly. This Sunday, we have our combat training for the children, the Little Warriors, at 8:30 a.m. and the True Nation workout at 10 a.m. So if you guys have some free time and find the importance in health and fitness, you guys definitely need to come out. Also, don't forget that we will be having our virtual concert on Saturday, August 29th. Please. Quick question, T. Are people, I know we're encouraging everyone to get online, but if people want to actually come in, what do you think about that? That's what I'm referring to us. It's good? Okay. So if you decide to actually come in physically, that's also encouraged as well. Y'all can turn up with us. Yeah, just the members. And it'll hype us up here. Looks good online. So definitely come in, but also, what is it called? Pull it up on the stream, share it, and all that good stuff so we can get it out to the people. Please continue to promote and share the flyer so that we have as many viewers as we can online. And if you have not already, please submit your August alms. And please include the following brothers and sisters in your prayers for healing, protection, and blessings. Brother Ayal, Brother Nakar, and Sister Tamala. And lastly, we have food and drinks available for everyone to partake in after the closing Sabbath class. So that's the announcements for today.
Yeah, we're gonna make that after he was finished. I was gonna see if he was gonna announce it first. I thought you were gonna do it because I thought you was reading everything going on.
Also, totally forgot about that. Also, okay. On Sunday, and she disappeared. Or tomorrow, do we know what time it is? 1 p.m.? Tomorrow, 1 p.m., we have the giveaway party at Lisa's house. So if you have anything that is in pretty good condition that you don't use anymore, that you feel like someone else would have use of, bring it over to Lisa's house, and everyone will pretty much examine, look at it, and see if they want to take it. So so we have the giveaway party tomorrow as well. So don't forget about that.
All right, then also too, making sure tomorrow we do have our first 10 financial literacy class. So make sure that you're here 1 o'clock p.m. That'll be our first financial literacy class. All right, so I'll be from 1 to 2. So it won't be completely 1 to 2. It'll only be like 30 minutes and like 15 minutes for Q&A. Then we'll be done with that. Then from 2 to 3, we got our Forex workshop for those who want to learn about Forex, foreign exchange, trading, things of that nature. So we'll be having that. For both of which, highly encourage, leadership to come out, all leaders, things of that nature. But it's open, to all members, things of that nature too. So definitely encourage you to come out for both of those, get the information, things of that nature, and then you decide, hey, we're going to have it every month anyway, but if you missed it like this month, it's not like, snap, I'll never get it again. It's going to be every month. Every month we're going to have financial literacy classes, things going on, so to make sure that you guys are getting the thing that you need, all right? So different knowledge, different things, get to start building what we need to build. Any questions? No? Any questions? Anything of that nature? Go ahead. Yeah, we can have those things set up. So I'll set up those things, and we'll have the conference line, set up. So we'll have AB set up the conference line, whichever, leads from AB that'll, be here, and then also send the Zoom information too. Yeah, not a problem. Anything else? All right, let's go ahead and close out. Madam, open our shalom. Let's go ahead and stand and rise, faith treatment. Say our prayer to Heavenly Father. Through Yahweh, through the Shah, we thank you for gathering us here today. We ask that you uplift us, Father. We ask that you increase us in faith and spirit and righteousness. That you also increase us in just in health, Father, in health and wellness, and in our mental health, our physical health, our spiritual health, Father, our financial health. Just get us right, Father, but most importantly, get us righteously right, and then everything else we know to help come with the territory. So we ask that, just as it was your will to bring us here safe and sound, if it be your will that you also allow us to return from whence we came safe and sound. We ask all these things in your name, Son, that we pray. Amen. Now, Shabbat Shemayim, Kadash, Aya, Shanka, Yahweh, Malakwata, Aba'a, Ratazaka, Aya, Aisha, Barataza, Kabo, Aya, Bashamayim, Nathanawa, Lakam, Za, Yawon, Masalak Nawa, Gabawak Nawa, Kasalak Nawa, Kalawak Nawa, Wala'a, Dabayan Nawa, Manasai Wan, Kabal, Awashai Nawa, Maram, Rai, Kaya, Laka, Amakwa, Wala'ala, Wathal Pararath, Wa'ala, Walahawa, Wanamshai.
Now for the translation in English. After this manner, therefore, pray ye, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Padre nuestro que estás en los cielos, santificado sea tu nombre, venga tu reino, sea hecha tu voluntad, como en el cielo, así también en la tierra. Danos hoy nuestro pan cotidiano y perdonanos nuestras deudas, como también nosotros perdonamos a nuestros deudores. Y no nos metas en tentación, mas líbranos del mal, porque tuyo es el reino y el poder y la gloria por todos los siglos. Amén.
Careful, my portfolio. It is most holy unto you. up, mamas? Walking with the baby, you good? Okay, I'll go ahead and get those things set up. Okay. Cool. Yeah, not a problem. Tomorrow will be like a general because every month it'll be like a different focus. You know, kind of even like we come down to financial is more like the broad term that we kind of deal with. All right. This month we might really be dealing with mutual funds. What is a mutual fund? Like why make money to different types? That's not the trust fund. So this fund will, portion will, do you have a will, how do you go made, and then like everyone's kind of different things to kind of get equal.
Okay, so here's the situation, right? Like this ministry and all of that
Right.
So, I was going to pick 3 people, a couple, and 1 person I said to work with their credit. I just started working with it, not shoes.
Okay.
And I want to learn as well. I know a lot about it, but I'm also, my husband advised me I should learn to do taxes. So hopefully I'll be able to get a class on that. That's 8 to 12 weeks long.
Okay.
About stuff like that. So hopefully people will get interested in those financial classes, and then I can get some information.
So we'll start with us, and then it'll be open. So people will be able to sing around the family, whoever else. We want to start vision. Start with our body to get our people in a better place where they're the focus. So, and then also making time to be able to address all their needs and concerns, really take care of our body. Then when we're good, we can start adding other brothers and sisters and other congregations, things of that nature. And the goal is to make our school a little staple in the community to where we know True Nation, they get glad they got, mandates at the public release aside from the True Nation. And most are willing to have to learn from it. And it only helps us to further word the truth and keep us the other fast that within the next couple of days.
Okay.
So,
I'll tell you about the rate.
yeah, and I'll send it to your email. You can text me the email you prefer. Resend it to. Mom, get yourself together.